Hey everybody, this is Robert from Black Belt Gaming doing another entry into my AD&D first edition series. And the idea that I'm working with tonight may span several videos because I've refilmed this so many times and I just go on too long about it. There's too much to talk about, so I'm going to try to break it up a little bit. But the topic I'm discussing is the feel of first edition AD&D. Well, I guess you may ask why. Why am I talking about the feel of first edition AD&D? Well, I think one of the reasons was back when there was an explosion of popularity with third edition, there was a company, and I don't want to get the name wrong, but there was a company who had this catchphrase, third edition rules, first edition feel. And when I looked at that product, I knew exactly what they meant, or at least what it meant to me. It had meaning, and we must share something in common there for them to be able to say something like that. First edition feel. I've also seen in more recent editions, clones of D&D, other versions of it, that are trying to recapture the feeling of first edition advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Even something, I don't have this book, but it's called Dungeon Crawl Classics. I hear that that's a game that also tries to kind of capture the feel of first edition AD&D. So that's why I'm going to talk about it. What is, at least to me, the feeling of first edition AD&D? I debated whether to start with this picture or finish with it. And I'm going to be probably making a couple more videos about this, but let's go ahead and start with this. I think this really captures the heart of what our first edition AD&D games were about. We were treasure hunters. Our characters were not fresh off the farm, but we were inexperienced. We just had enough training to be able to put on our armor, and we knew how to use a few weapons, but we had very little wealth and we had very little experience, and we needed to go out into the world and become powerful heroes. We were absolutely not heroes at the start. In fact, very few of us would ever make it to anything remotely called a hero. We were treasure hunters because the rules of the game, AD&D First Edition, if you go to the Dungeon Master's Guide, you'll see that there's a rule that gold pieces turn into experience points. I believe each gold piece is worth 1 experience point. And so what you see in this picture is very much how our games went and how we kind of approach the game. This would be, some people talk about how you don't really win D&D. This was a way that you, in our group, won. You survived. You survived and you got out of the dungeon with your treasure. In this picture, we see this group of 3. Who knows how many were in the party originally? There may have been 10. There may have been 5. They're very lucky if there were only 3 and all 3 survived. They've got their weapons. Maybe not because they expected to go into the dungeon and just kick open the door and tear monsters apart and take their stuff. You see that in games like the Munchkin card game. You see it in some other video games like Diablo and these other games. Also, I'm using Fantasy Grounds and running a game for a group for using the 5th edition rules. And it's not uncommon for the big Goliath barbarian to kick open the door, and the war cleric has his bow and arrow ready, and the others in the party just kind of charge in and take on whatever's in the room, just head on, wipe them out, and maybe a few die rolls might not go their way, and they might get into a little bit of trouble, but they're kind of fearless. That's so different from how we played back in the old days. We were terrified. It was almost like a survival horror game. It was thrilling when you could survive and get out of there and get treasure and actually start to even make any progress towards leveling up your character. But I've noticed in games that have become more about just kicking open the door and fighting the creatures and roll, rolling the dice, roll damage, back and forth. It becomes a grind. And our games were not like that at all. Hit points were low. You could start out a character and very possibly start with 1 hit point or 2 hit points. That means a single blow could kill you. So the last thing you wanted to do was try to confront some great threat face to face. You wanted to be sneaky about it. You wanted to be clever about it. You wanted to try to find other ways to get the treasure and get out of there alive. So in order to kind of do that, you needed to go to the local hot spots, find out any rumors of what was going on, and there may be stories of some ancient or some old ruins that have strange lights appearing, and adventurers have gone in there and never returned, and there's rumor of great treasure there that has been long lost. And that was the kind of thing that got us to pull together and say, all right, why don't we go and check it out? And so it was more of an independent operation like that. We weren't necessarily being hired by the king to save the princes. I mean, there were games where that did happen, but most of the time we were, greedy treasure hunters trying to get the loot and get out of there. And that's what I see in this picture. This party has managed their resources. You can see he's still holding his torch. He's got his bag of gold. He looks very happy to have made it. He's looking back over his shoulder to make sure the coast is clear. We've got the guys already at the doorway. They're thrilled to be out of there, thrilled to be alive. And that was kind of what the games were all about. So treasure hunters and survival was really at the heart of what the first edition feel was for us. Another picture I really like is this one. And if I were to say treasure hunting is part 1 of this video, I would say clever play is part 2. When I see people make characters nowadays, it's very much about character abilities. Whether that's 3rd edition, 4th edition, 5th edition, Pathfinder, whatever, it's very much, to me, focused on what kind of special abilities, what kind of feats, what kind of power is my character going to wield. And it becomes a power game. And AD&D was, for us, not like that. It took a long time, in general, to make it from one level to another. We rarely made it very high. You've maybe even seen some old articles about how Gandalf was probably only about a 6th level magic user. And being a clever player was a big part of the enjoyment of AD&D. So it wasn't really about your character abilities, it was about being a skillful player, a careful player, thoughtful player, observant, inquisitive. You ask a lot of questions, you got a lot of description, and you carefully made your way through these different challenges. So instead of just speaking in such broad terms, let me put it in something a little more tangible, so to speak. equipment lists. When I see people make their characters nowadays, it's very much focused on those abilities, and sure, there's some interest in what armor and weapon they're going to choose, but then they might just say, I'm going to get Adventuring Pack A, and they just sort of rush through that, and I don't want to have to pick out all that stuff. Let me just take a big pack full of goodies and get started. The game was very different for us with respect to that. Selecting your equipment was one of the longest parts of character generation that there was. Rolling ability scores, writing down the name of your class. There really weren't any abilities to write down unless you were a thief or something and had a few skills to write down. Or maybe if you were a wizard or a magic user or a cleric, you needed to write down a spell or two, but none of these feats and racial abilities and all that, there weren't big lists or anything that I recall. And so our character sheets were pretty simple. But the equipment, we definitely took our time. I wonder if the old video games were inspired by AD&D in this way. But when I think back to some of the first games I played on a computer, and we're talking adventure, text games like, I think it was called Ra'akatu and Zork, Frankenstein. There were others that were text-based games. Those games, you never knew what you were going to run into, and you had to carefully look around and pick up pieces of this, that, and the other, and in order to progress in the adventure, you had to have the right bit of equipment or the right piece of the puzzle before you could move on. Our AD&D games were like that. Even later, when games started to get some graphics, like King's Quest, I really wanted my little guy to be strong. I wanted him to be able to just put on a big set of armor and just chop his way through the encounters. But it didn't work that way. You had to have the right things, and you had to be thoughtful enough and put them together in the right way to make it work. And only that way could you unlock the next door or defeat the giant or whatever you were doing along the way. And so choosing the right clothes, for example, the right kind of boots, the right kind of belt, what kind of packs or sacks or pouches or whatever you were going to carry or have on your person so that you could carry the treasure that you find. Having the rope, the torches, the tinderbox with flint and steel, iron spikes, 10-foot poles, flasks of oil. All of these things were very important because the way we played it, and it wasn't just some ability check, it was really whether you had the right equipment or not that made the difference in a lot of situations. So if we had fallen into a deep pit and we wanted to climb out, if we didn't have the rope and the hook to get out, or iron spikes, something like that, we were stuck. It wasn't just somebody making some athletics check and you're out of the pit. We had to have the right tools. So think of it like yourself. If you're trying to climb some mountain, you're going to need the right tools to do that, or you're going to be at a very high risk to fall and die if you don't have the right rope and the right tools to accomplish the job. And so that was a big part of how we played. So what kind of boots made a difference on how much noise you made. So if we were trying to be stealthy, maybe you wanted the softer boots. If we were in a swampy situation and you had the high boots with the hard sole, you were in much better condition than, say, somebody who might have the low soft boots in those situations. They're going to lose their boots and be in big trouble as they're trying to make their way through the swamp. And so finding the torches, you could run out of torchlight and be in big trouble. And I remember back, one of the first computers I ever owned, it didn't even have a screen. You had to plug it into your TV. There was a game called Dungeons of Daggeroth. And the graphics were so simple. It was just lines on the screen. Not quite stick figures, but pretty close to it. And the neat thing was that lighting was critical to that game. You started out with just a torch, and it would burn out, but you could only see kind of so far in the distance, and you could hear monsters roaming around. Maybe it would be quiet at first, and all you would hear is your own heartbeat. But then as a monster was approaching from the distance, say you heard this tss sound, you knew a snake was coming. And you'd have to look around and find out where it was coming from. And if you had just the little torch, you wouldn't see this thing until it was almost right on top of you. And in order to respond and engage this thing, you had to type in the commands to draw your weapon and equip your weapon and attack. And you had to define which hand you were attacking with. And, if your torch went out and you were in this dungeon, you could hardly see anything. You were bumping into walls, you can't find the door, the monster's on top of you, and you don't know if he's to the right, left, straight ahead, or right behind you, until he starts pounding on you, and then you try to turn around and you might be able to roughly make out his figure in front of you. It was terrifying. And so our D&D games were much like that, which was probably an inspiration for this video game. You needed the right equipment to survive. And so we talked about treasure hunting and survival. Equipment was a big part of that. And we're not talking about just the magical stuff. We're talking about the mundane equipment. I mean, a candle could make the difference between life and death in some situations. Even as far as having a belt or something in your inventory where if someone fell down into the pit or fell down in a hole or something, that you could take off your belt and kind of lay on the edge and lower it down to them for them to grab on, and you could try to pull them up. It was you used a great deal of imagination. Using that 10-foot pole, you've probably heard a lot of stories about that, about how that was used to sort of check the floor in front of you, and iron spikes being used to make sure that the door can't be opened behind you or whatever. So creative, just very, you had to be very clever in the way that you used your equipment in order to face the challenges ahead of you. So that's kind of part 2 here of this one video here about the feel of first edition. Treasure hunting and equipment lists. So I'll talk about some more. There's a lot more to talk about, but I think I'll stop there today. So thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll catch you later.